Now, a ship carrying the first group of migrants from Italy has arrived in Albania this morning, marking the start of a controversial plan to process thousands of asylum seekers in the Balkan nation.
Yes, so while Italy is deporting migrants who've arrived in the country illegally, here in the UK, the government is actively looking for more hotels to put illegal migrants up in. This despite Keir Starmer promising to end the use of migrant hotels during the election campaign multiple times and, of course, slamming the Tories' record on the very same thing. Let's have a look at what he had to say last year.
They sit in hotels and digs for months on end at the taxpayers' expense. Last year, he promised to end the hotel farce. That's the talk. But because of his mess, there are thousands of people who can't claim asylum and can't be returned. So where does he actually think they're going to end up?
Well, it's a very different tone we're hearing from the government today. 2 years ago, very happy to criticise the use of hotels, to say that government policy has inevitably led to the use of hotels. Now, looking to requisition more. Almost 14,000 asylum seekers have crossed the Channel since Labour came to power, surpassing the number under the Conservatives in the first half of the year. Well, Italy seems to have a plan, deporting these people for processing, but does Britain?
That's a big question. Well, for more on this, we can speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, and also the content lead at the Centre for Migration Control, Charlie Downs. Mark, we'll start with you. Are you surprised that the government are actually now not only continuing with the policy of migrant hotels, but actually looking to expand it?
Not in the slightest. I mean, the government, I think, is learning the hard way, really, that there is no quick fix to the small boats crisis, and it's all well and good in the campaign coming up with these promises to scrap the reliance on these thousands or hundreds of hotels across the country, housing up to 56,000 people at its peak, and to end the reliance on these former RAF bases and the BB Stockholm barge down in Dorset. But then the reality is, where on earth do you put them? And as you said in the introduction there, we are now at that grim milestone where we have more Channel migrants who've crossed illegally from France in the 3.5 months since Labour took office than in the 6 months when the Conservatives were in office. Yes, of course, in the first 6 months of the year, the weather was a bit more inclement in the Channel. But even during the summer, we've had some pretty horrific conditions out in the Channel, but still a surge. And what do you do when you've got close to 14,000 additional people coming across the Channel and you're saying you're not going to use hotels anymore? You realise, of course, you have to use hotels. And that's why, although they're not saying it publicly, we understand the government is in negotiations with a number of hotel chains to get more bed spaces.
This is fascinating, Mark, because, of course, it sounds like hotels are a fairly expensive place in which to put people who have recently arrived. But is the uncomfortable truth of this, perhaps, that the government has got in, have looked at the books, have assessed the numbers and realised that actually all the other options are more expensive?
Well, there's a real issue in terms of actually where you house people, not just in the short term, but in the longer term as well. And what the government had planned in ending our reliance on hotels for asylum seekers was to distribute them across the country. So what that means is local authorities already struggling with their own sort of council and social accommodation for people would have to make more housing stock available for asylum seekers. Yeah, they might get some more money for that, but there's no quick and easy solution to freeing up more housing stock for these asylum seekers. So the obvious solution, the best and quickest solution for the government, as they would see it, would be to free up more hotel spaces. But that then takes these hotels out of use in communities where sometimes they're the only asset in smaller communities in particular for weddings and other sort of functions, and for the likes of business people coming into that area no longer able to use these hotels because they're being used instead by asylum seekers.
Yes, I mean, in one day last week, 900 people crossed. Presumably that's an entire hospital, an entire hotel, entire Premier Inn. I don't know.
That's a good couple of hotels, at least.
A good couple of hotels. You need a lot of accommodation. Charlie Downs, you're from the Centre for Migration Control, a think tank that wants to reduce immigration, get the borders under control.
Indeed.
This model that Italy's looking at, is that an answer?
I think it's important to put these things in perspective, both with regards to Britain's illegal migration situation and also Italy's. Now, Britain, research out of the Oxford Migration Observatory a couple of weeks ago suggested that there are as many as 750,000 illegal migrants in Britain, which makes us the illegal immigration capital of Europe. Now, these seem to be quite conservative figures because research from Pew in 2017, 7 years ago, suggested that there could be as many as 1.2 million here. So higher estimates go right the way up to 2 million. So it's clear that there is a problem with illegal migration, not just in the small boats coming to Britain, but with the people already here. And these are people who, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they've come from, and in many cases they're going into this kind of black economy working as, on the lighter side, maybe Deliveroo drivers, on the darker side, drug dealers, for instance. Now, if I may, very quickly, this is obviously the case with Britain, but this scheme that's being implemented in Italy is being called controversial. But what's important to understand is this first boat that has gone from Italy to Albania has gone from Lampedusa, which is a tiny island in the Mediterranean Ocean between the north coast of Africa and the south coast of Italy. It's an island with a population of about 6,500, and in a single week in September of last year, over 10,000 North African migrants, illegal North African migrants to be clear, arrived on the shores of Lampedusa, and we saw scenes there that looked, I don't know what it looked like some sort of dystopian fantasy fiction novel or something like this. So to the people who are calling it controversial, I would say, speak to the people of Lampedusa, and I think they would say it's not just, it's not just existentially necessary, but whether or not it's going to be called controversial by sort of liberal press outlets is completely irrelevant if the island of Lampedusa is to survive in any kind of recognisable form.
And yet is the distinction here not that this is for processing rather than for final settlement, a distinction from the Rwanda scheme?
I think that is an important detail, but I think the first priority, especially in the case of Lampedusa, where it was completely overwhelmed in that single week, is just moving these people from the island, from the residential areas of the island, to somewhere where they're not going to pose a threat to the people living there. Because, again, as much as these might be, women and children from war-torn countries, now the footage seems to suggest that it was only young men, fighting-age males, regardless of their intentions, again, we don't know who these people are, and so we can't take the risk of allowing them to just be among the population of these places.
And, Mark, just on that point, whether it's controversial or not, people want to know whether it will work, it will have a deterrent effect.
Yeah, I think it probably will. I was in Lampedusa last year watching these thousands of migrants coming in there, and it was horrific for locals on that island having to deal with that, and for the Italian authorities as well. That's why Giorgia Meloni, the new Italian Prime Minister, reached out to Albania to strike this deal. It's £560 million over 5 years. But it will be worth it, as far as Italy is concerned, if it can be that deterrent. And you're right, Tom, to say it differs from the Rwanda scheme in that it is not final settlement. If they are granted asylum, they can, in theory, return to Italy.
But we know that Italy is a member of the ECHR, signs up to the UN 1951 Convention on Refugees. Yes. All of these different international structures will mean the vast majority of people will be able to say they come from a country that is less developed, with fewer opportunities. Perhaps they could say they were in fear for their lives, and they'll be granted asylum, despite being processed somewhere else.
Well, what Italy says with regard to that is there are 21 countries that they've deemed to be safe countries where migrants come from to try to get to Italy and then into the EU. And so what they're doing is they're sending only males, non-vulnerable males, who come from one of these safe countries. So this first boatload in to Albania today had 10 from Bangladesh and another 6 males from Egypt, both countries that Italy deems to be safe countries. So as far as Italy is concerned, they will work on the presumption that the vast majority of those people will not get their asylum claims accepted and therefore will be returned to their home countries. So it's only from these safe countries that they will be then sending them to Albania.
Okay, Starmer has been, seen out talking with Giorgia Meloni. You never know.
Listen,
very quickly,
there's one thing to add to this, that just whether Keir Starmer goes for this kind of Italian model or not, he could be a net beneficiary of this. The EU is actively discussing similar models now for a number of countries in the EU. If that reduces the number, if it becomes a deterrent and reduces the numbers of migrants coming into the EU, that reduces the numbers coming up to northern France to try to get to the UK.
An important point. Mark White, thank you so much for joining us, and Charlie Downs before as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Well,